Hi everyone, it's John, and welcome back to my channel. It is November 4th, 2021, and I wanted to talk about another book review that I have for you this week. This book is by a writer I haven't read in quite a while. In fact, I think it's been so long that I don't think I've reviewed anything by this writer on my channel yet. And the book is by Forster, and it's Maurice. I know Americans will want to pronounce that Maurice, but Forster was English, and over in England it's pronounced Maurice. I wanted to talk a little bit about the publication history of Maurice, the two men who inspired it, and very possibly another novelist who sort of consciously or unconsciously riffed off, depending on how generous you want to be, the theme. Maurice is Ian Forster's novel of gay love in Edwardian England. It is about the relationship between two men. And it's as far as I can tell, it's really one of the first novels by a novelist who didn't really ever identify himself as a gay man, except in his private life, of the 20th century. Trying to think of earlier ones, having difficulty. Of course, I'll tell you how this was published later. He ended up never publishing it in his lifetime. But as far as writers that are still well known today, this might be one of the earliest examples of a gay novel written by someone who is still widely read. Trying to think of exceptions to that, but not having a really good time of it. It's supposedly based off of the real-life relationship between two men named Edward Carpenter and George Merrill. Edward Carpenter is the somewhat remembered English utopian socialist, gay rights activist and liberationist, vegetarian, very progressive for his day. And Forster wrote this mostly in 1913 and 14, when he was in his mid-30s. He already had a couple of well-known novels, including Howard Zinn, behind him when he wrote this. He revised it somewhat thoroughly throughout his lifetime. It's hard to tell without an extensively sort of critical edition. He revised it after he wrote it about 20 years later, and then he revised it once more about 10 years before he died. He dies in 1971, so around 1960. He kept it from the public eye by choosing not to publish it within his lifetime. But like I said, he did show it to several of his friends. It finally appeared in 1971. Or I think he might have died in 1970. It appears in 1971, 6 months after his death. And we have fellow gay author Christopher Isherwood to thank for shepherding Maurice out of what probably otherwise would have been literary obscurity. So, as far as what happens in Maurice, the novel begins with Maurice at Cambridge. He's met another student named Clive Durham, who is interested in philosophy, especially the ancient Greeks, and loves reading about the Greeks, Greek love, literary and philosophical explorations of Greek love, like the one in Plato's Symposium, etc. Maybe tellingly, especially their discussions of homosexual love. After a trip to Italy, they sort of realize after several meetings with one another that their relationship is more than just platonic, and that they have romantic feelings for one another. But after a trip to Italy, Clive decides, for reasons that are made not so clear in the book, to completely reinvent himself in the image of a heterosexual man and sort of disabuses himself of his past with Maurice and perhaps other men as well. He decides to get married and to become a stockbroker, which is sort of like the perfect bourgeois foil for what he wants to be. Maurice is invited to come meet the Durhams, Clive, and his wife, where he ends up meeting their groundskeeper, whose name is Alec Scudder. They end up, through some, weird coincidence, spending the night together in Maurice's room that he's staying in Clive's house. Maurice realizes what he's done, he panics, and Alec sort of sends him letters telling him how genuinely he feels for Maurice, and Maurice doesn't respond, thinking that if he engages him any further, he will only, draw himself further into what could be a trap. And then Alec threatens to out Maurice to his friends and family. Maurice visits his psychiatrist, who advises him to move to a country where homosexuality isn't illegal. Maurice meets Alec again to reconcile and tells him that he plans to leave the country for Argentina because it has a lot of hot-ripped gauchos with sinewy muscles walking around in assless chaps. Just kidding. I don't know if he wanted to go there because homosexuality was legal there, or it was just, practically the other side of the world. Either way, that was the plan. Maurice lays it all on the table, tells Alec that he will do anything, risk anything, his position in society, his financial security, everything, his job, just to be with him. Alec doesn't accept the offer, and they finally part. But despite giving up some of the major plot points and setting things up to sound like they end tragically for everyone involved, I'm just going to stop here, urge you to read the novel, and I'm not going to give any more spoilers because I think the way it ends is, I don't want to say it here. Despite being, on its surface, a love story between men, Maurice has a lot of other things going on with it and for it that it gets less credit for. It is largely an indictment, needless to say, of late Victorian, or I should say Edwardian, sexual morality, and the neuroses it induces in the people that it fruitlessly try to escape it. It's no small wonder that when Maurice asks his psychiatrist if he thinks England will ever accept homosexuality and homosexuals, the psychiatrist replies, "I doubt it. England has always been disinclined to accept human nature." The history of the critical reception of Maurice is just as fascinating as its publication history. It received a lot of flack for being what we might call, what has been called, an ideological novel. That is, a novel with the singular purpose of publicizing, in this case, the plight of the homosexual man. Consequently, it's been compared unfavorably with works like Howard's End and Passage to India for being a work of relatively and comparatively minor literary achievement. I don't think contemporary critics, or even critics of the newly arrived novel 50 years ago, are often able to fully realize the limitations and the circumlocutions that Forster had to work with, lest he unintentionally put himself in prison. It was, after all, only in 1967, in Forster's 88th year, that England passed the Sexual Offences Act, uh, which legalized homosexuality in England. And even after that, thousands of men were regularly arrested for that quote-unquote crime. It wasn't officially until the year 2013, more than 40 years after Forster had already died, that homosexuality was finally decriminalized once and for all. The critical accusation that Forster was attempting to somehow draw attention to the plight of the homosexuals seems pretty petty and nattering and cruel, especially in light of the fact that he purposefully chose not to publish it in his lifetime. It doesn't make a lot of sense to say that he's drawing attention to something that he chose not to publish. Even if Maurice just happened to be a novel that appeared at a time when it was more often used as a token symbol for gay liberation, which it very often was in the early 70s, than as a text that is appreciated for its literary merit, Forster nevertheless deserves credit for rendering a love story in a society that refused to see him or his characters for who they were, even if it was in the coded, veiled language that English society demanded at the time. That act alone helped push homosexuality an inch closer to political and social visibility. And I would argue that it rendered a novel that is as beautiful and appropriate as it was when it was written nearly 110 years ago. So this comes with a pretty high recommendation from me, even if the only reason you might want to read it is for the history of LGBT fiction or something. I think it also happens to be fairly well written too. For anyone who cares about such things, I gave it 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. I know a lot of people don't really care about that, but just to sort of quantify my appreciation. Maurice by Ian Forster. If anyone has read it or wants to share any information about it down below, please do so. And I will see you later. Bye, everyone.